The Red Sea.
Bab el-Mandeb Strait and Suez Canal are three of the world's most important geostrategic locations, as they make up the shortest seaborne route from Europe to Asia. Stretching for 2,250 kilometers or 1,398 miles, the Red Sea is a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean, lying between the continents of Africa and Asia. At its widest point, the Red Sea is 355 kilometers or 220.6 miles wide. The Red Sea, as a larger geostrategic location, is made up of three smaller geostrategic points, these being the inlet or sea as a body of water in itself. At the northernmost end of the long body of water, the Suez Canal, and to the south the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Built by the Suez Canal Company between 1859 and 1869, the Suez Canal was officially opened on the 17th of November 1869. Offering a more direct route between the North Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean, the canal reduces the journey distance from India to Europe by roughly 7,000 kilometers or 4,300 miles. The canal itself is approximately 121 miles long and can accommodate many large container and tanker vessels. Currently, 2.5% of the world's oil output travels through the canal, which has a capacity of approximately 97 ships per day. In 2018, 18,000 ships used the waterway, a 3.6% increase from 2017, with vessel size growing by 12%. Container ships were the most common vessel in 2018, with more than 9% of international trade passing through the canal that year. In 2015, the new Suez Canal was completed and officially opened the following year in 2016. This new Suez Canal involved an increase in capacity by the digging of a second channel and cut waiting times from 13 hours to 3 hours. As of 2016, the new Suez Canal will generate a revenue increase for Egypt from $5 billion to $12.5 billion annually, as well as generate a new Suez Canal economic zone with Russian involvement. The city of New Ismailia was also built on the bank of the new Suez Canal to accommodate 500,000 Egyptians, easing the population burden on Cairo. Under the Convention of Constantinople, the canal may be used in time of war as in time of peace by every vessel of commerce or of war, without distinction of flag, essentially meaning that any state is free to use the canal if it is not at war with Egypt. Without the use of the canal, ships would have to travel a further 8,900 kilometers around the southern tip of Africa to reach Europe, making the Suez Canal arguably the world's most important geostrategic point, as whoever controls it has extreme geopolitical leverage over many other states. The Bab el-Mandeb, or quite literally the Gate of Tears, connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, being the other geostrategic point within the Red Sea area. Bordered to the northeast by Yemen, and to the southwest by Eritrea and Djibouti, the strait is divided into two channels by Perim Island. 600,000 barrels a day of crude oil from the Persian Gulf travels via the strait and north to the Suez Canal, then on to Europe and North America, while 120,000 travel the other way to Asia. Traffic heading for the Suez Canal from the Indian Ocean must travel through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which can often involve great risk from piracy and neighbouring conflicts, such as the war in Yemen. The unstable nature of many of the states surrounding the Bab el-Mandeb have led to some states intervening kinetically in the region. Saudi Arabia has recently backed a project that would see a bridge built across the strait, cutting journey times for land-based traffic which would no longer have to travel through Egypt and across the Sinai Peninsula. Fundamentally, both the Suez Canal and Bab el-Mandeb Strait form the world's two most critical choke points. Throughout history, the Red Sea has been a contested area and an important trade route. Many states and empires have come to dominate its shoreline, controlling the various geostrategic points which allow dominance of the larger region. Various historical figures, such as Darius of Persia, and Alexander the Great sent exploratory expeditions through the sea to gather data and establish potential trade and military routes. In the 1st century BC, under Emperor Augustus, the Red Sea was the preferred route for trade between the Roman Empire and India and China. For a period, the volume of trade grew, and the sea served as a communication route between Rome and China. However, this link was severed in the 3rd century AD when the Aksumite Empire took control of the Bab el-Mandeb region. During the Middle Ages, the Red Sea served as an important component of the spice trade route, which stretched from East Asia and India to the Mediterranean Sea. However, with the rise of the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century and the unwillingness to rely on a non-Christian power such as the Mamluk Empire, Europeans began to look for other routes for the trading of spices. As a result, European traders and explorers looked to the west and south to find new routes for the spice trade. Expeditions, mainly Portuguese, Spanish and Italian, circumnavigated the continent of Africa in 1497, opening a new alternative route to the Red Sea. Moving forward into the early colonial era, many European powers tried to gain control of the Red Sea and Suez region for their own geopolitical ends. In 1513, the Portuguese, led by Afonso de Albuquerque, sought to control the Red Sea in order to secure better access to their Indian and East Asian holdings and the trade which came with them. Following the collapse of Ottoman power, Egypt became an independent state and began a process of modernization. This included allowing a French and British plan to build a canal from Port Said in the Mediterranean to Port Tewfik in the Red Sea. Later, in 1875, the British would purchase all of the shares in the canal owned by Egypt and would come to control the state through a protectorate government in 1882. Additionally, earlier in 1856, the British had seized control of the island of Perim in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, giving the state control of the Red Sea as a geostrategic point. The Red Sea region today is once again shaped by the states which surround it. In the context of the Red Sea, US bases in Saudi Arabia allow the state to project kinetic power in the case of any attack on its interests, whether that be shipping or enemy units travelling through the water. Saudi Arabia has recently made a call for more cooperation between the states which border the Red Sea. In 2018, the state led a conference including Egypt, Djibouti, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen and Jordan with the intention of staving off negative outside influence in the region. Saudi Arabia also has plans to build a completely new smart city on the northeast corner of the Red Sea called Neom. Currently, little can be discerned about the geostrategic relevance of the city, as it is only in the early stages of construction. However, its proximity to Israel, Jordan and Egypt, and in particular the Suez Canal, will give Saudi Arabia greater geopolitical leverage over the affairs of those states and other states which depend upon the Red Sea. Israel holds a small 14-kilometre stretch of coastline on the Gulf of Aqaba, which allows the state access to the Red Sea without having to go through the Egyptian-held Suez Canal. For Israel, having a port on the Red Sea is about retaining its independence as a state surrounded by enemies, and the country has plans to modernise the small area, which will mean less reliance on states that it does not trust in the region. Saudi Arabia and Israel already play a large role in the Red Sea region and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Furthermore, both states have alliances with the United States and have their own armed forces, giving them further geopolitical leverage and kinetic power capacity. When it comes to geostrategy, Sudan has begun to look outwards in its Red Sea policy. Both Turkey and Qatar have expressed interest in building and managing ports on Sudan's Red Sea coastline. This will further Sudan's power and reputation on the global stage, as well as attract other potential allies for the state. It is the same city of Suakin and the island on which it is situated that modern-day Turkey is looking to revive as a Red Sea hub. Suakin's strategic value is derived from the fact that it is a halfway point between the Bab el-Mandeb and Gulf of Suez, as well as opposite the shores of Saudi Arabian, Mecca and Jeddah. If Turkey were to militarise Suakin, it would have a valuable geostrategic point from which it could project kinetic power. Whilst Turkey has stated that it currently has no militaristic intentions for Sudan, this is not the case in nearby Somalia, where the state has deployed advisors to train the Somali army, which has left experts speculating whether this could be repeated in Sudan. Neighbouring Sudan is war-torn Eritrea, which has a large Red Sea coastline that stretches from the Sudanese border in the north to the Djiboutian border in the south. As a somewhat underdeveloped Horn African state, Eritrea is also looking outwards for both economic and military assistance. Due to the threat of the recently established Chinese presence in Djibouti, the US has looked to establish a military presence in Eritrea. The US pivot to Eritrea has had profound effects on the security situation of the country, which recently signed a peace treaty with Ethiopia, furthering stability. Both Sudan and Eritrea can look forward to further economic development and investment from other states directly because of their Red Sea coastline. As these states continue to develop, there is nothing stopping them from becoming Red Sea powers in their own right. Djibouti is an interesting geopolitical case, with the small coastal state being prime real estate for any major power seeking influence in the Red Sea. Previously, Djibouti was controlled by the Ottoman Empire and colonial France due to its geostrategic location near the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. In the modern era, many states from around the world have taken an interest in the small African country due to the fact that its waters overlook 25% of the world's exports that flow into Asian and Mediterranean markets. Additionally, Djibouti's relative stability compared to some of its Horn neighbours makes the country an attractive investment for any state looking to expand its influence in East Africa. As mentioned prior, the US has a military base in Djibouti, which serves to protect US influence in the Bab el-Mandeb region. Alongside the US presence, the country has opened itself up to other states, including China, Japan, Italy, and France, which now all have their own bases to protect their geopolitical interests. A Russian request to set up a base in the country was recently rejected by the government due to Russian involvement in the Syrian civil war. Interestingly, the US base in Djibouti is situated only 6 miles away from the newly built Chinese base. Djibouti is critical to Chinese interests in Africa and could act as a major gateway for Chinese influence on the continent. The current civil war in Yemen has left the state's Red Sea policy somewhat confused. Most likely, Yemeni policy towards the Red Sea will be defined by the victors of the conflict. If Iranian-backed Houthi rebels prevail, then Yemen may become a security issue for the United States and some Western shipping traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, as the country is situated on its eastern coastline. However, if government-backed forces win, then the country may choose to align with the US and its other Middle Eastern allies. Finally, Saudi plans to build a bridge across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait may further aid Yemen's development. Egypt controls the premier geostrategic point of the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. The canal has long been a point of contention with outside powers, namely Britain, France, and the United States. Now, Egypt is faced with pressure from all sides as the demographic changes of many African and Asian states mean increased demand for passage through the canal. Since 2011, trade from Southeast Asia to the Mediterranean has jumped 37%, with growth to and from the Gulf of Suez, where China is the final destination, up 77%. Never was pressure from outside powers more evident than in the Suez Crisis of 1956, when the French and British invaded and captured the canal following its nationalisation by then-leader Gamal Abdel Nasser. The enormous geostrategic importance of the canal was demonstrated by this crisis, as the former colonial powers were willing to go to great length to ensure free passage for their naval traffic. In the modern day, Egypt will most likely face pressure from China and India as these countries seek to expand trade with Europe and the Americas. From the end of Ottoman control to the modern day, Egypt has experienced a lot of political turmoil, which has inevitably impacted its Red Sea policy. The 2011 revolution and the subsequent political and geopolitical chaos that followed it have meant that Egypt has drawn closer to many different states. Since the 2013 military coup that deposed Mohamed Morsi, one such state that Egypt has increased cooperation with is Russia, with the aim of strengthening military and economic ties. Some examples of Russo-Egyptian cooperation include plans for greater economic ties, conflict resolution in Syria, and the building of a nuclear plant with Russian loans. The joint aim of both states is to promote regional stability through the building of strong national states.